Hey friend, and welcome back to the Alex Makes VR podcast. Today is episode number 7 of my series where I take you step by step through the process on how to make a virtual reality film. In today's episode, we're going to talk about storyboarding. We're going to talk about how 360 and VR storyboards differ from film storyboards, traditional flatty films as we call them in the industry. We're going to talk about how important your storyboard is, not only to production, but also the post-production of your virtual reality film, and lots more. But before we dive into any of that, I have a bit of a dilemma that I want to talk to you guys about. You see, when I first started this mini-series, this How to Make a Virtual Reality Film series, the idea was that I used these podcasts as a bit of a behind the scenes of me making my next VR drama, Bad News. If you listen to episode 1, that's absolutely my intention for the podcast is to almost bring you along for the process of making Bad News. It wasn't supposed to be this kind of VR film school lecture series that it's turned into. And I'm not going to lie, I quite like that it's turned into that. It feels a lot more kind of concise. It's a bit more value first. It's very, I guess, compact. You could listen to the whole series when it's complete and almost treat that as your own mini course on how to make a virtual reality film. But that wasn't the intention. The original intention of the project was to, like I say, to bring you along behind the scenes of making Bad News. But the truth is that as of this episode, the podcast has now outpaced where we are with Bad News as a production. And that's for loads of different reasons, which I won't bore you with. But ultimately, a pandemic, unforeseen circumstances, COVID compliancy production guidelines, like loads of stuff that has been thrown into the kind of the works has meant that we are now stalled with where we are with Bad News. And I can't really foresee us picking up production until May at the very earliest, to be honest. Now, that means that I kind of have a decision to make with this particular podcast series, with the How to Make a Virtual Reality Film series. I can either carry on doing these weekly episodes and just talking you through every step of the process like I have been doing, or I can kind of stop and pause this part of the series and pick back up again when we continue on with Bad News, so that I can talk about the process through the lens of that particular production. Now, either way, I don't really mind. I feel like this series has kind of taken on a bit of a life of its own. And like I said, it almost could act as a mini course. Like every week you're tuning in and you're getting that next lecture on how to actually make one of these VR films. And I can always pick up the behind the scenes diary entry vloggy style podcast with Bad News when we do continue on with that. So I'm very happy to carry on with this series as it is every week, coming out with a new part of the process, if that is what you guys want. If you want that, please reach out and let me know, because as you know, podcasting is a bit of a lone wolf activity, and it's not like doing a kind of live talk where I can gauge your engagement and your feedback. I mean, I can see the listener numbers, and I know that there's a lot of you that come back every week, so that tells me that maybe you do want me to carry on. But I would love to hear from you. If you've been getting value from these episodes, if you want me to carry on and complete the kind of series talking you through every step of production and post-production, then let me know. And if not, then I will pause here and I will resume when Bad News, the production of my new VR film, has picked back up again. So let me know, reach out to me. It's Alex Makes VR on Instagram, Twitter and LinkedIn. And if you want to email me, it's alexmakesvr@gmail.com. If you're already subscribed to the newsletter, you can just reply to any of the newsletters. That just comes straight to me in my inbox. So please let me know, because I would love, even if it's just like a couple of words like carry on, carry on the podcast or something, that will let me know whether or not I should kind of hit pause on this particular mini-series. And if you're listening in the future, then this is obviously completely irrelevant, because I've either already finished the the series, or you're listening to this in a time when I've not posted updates for months, and so that kind of tells you what the decision was. So sorry about that, future listeners. But yeah, if you're a current listener, please reach out to me. It would mean the world. Okay, enough of that. Let's get on with today's episode about storyboarding. Okay, so let's start by talking about why storyboarding is important to begin with, because I feel like this is maybe an overlooked part of the prep process. And I'm not going to lie, this was a part of the production process that I used to think was a bit of a nice to have. I very naively used to go into shoots without a storyboard, without a plan, because I just wanted to kind of go with the flow and see what happened in the moment and be a bit more improv and DIY about it. But what I failed to realise was that a 360 and a VR shoot are way too technically challenging to just wing it. It's all right if you're a self-shooting traditional filmmaker where, you know, you've got control over the camera and everything's very easily set up, and ultimately all you have to worry about is what is happening in front of that lens in that little 16:9 triangle. Rectangle, I mean. But with 360 and VR, there's obviously so many things that could affect your post-production. There are so many things that will basically just completely ruin a shot and make it unusable from a technical point of view. So you have to plan, you have to prepare. And not only are you doing a storyboard to kind of prevent any big technical catastrophes on set, you are also using that blueprint as a kind of a signal to your crew members, to your production staff, to your team, that you know what you're doing. And I cannot stress this enough. This was something that I really overlooked. Part of your job as the director of a piece is to give everyone else confidence that you know where you are steering that ship. Okay, if you use the captain metaphor, you're the captain of the ship. It's your job to make sure that you are steering that ship and you are giving your crew confidence that you know where you're going, where you are taking that ship. What is the end destination? If you rocked up and was like, I don't know, got a vague idea, but we'll just make it up, you destabilize every part of the production process, because you don't, basically, if you don't have the confidence of knowing what you want to achieve, how on earth is anyone else going to have confidence in doing their job? Because their decision making relies on yours, and if you've not made any decisions, then you see what a kind of a tailspin you can end up running into. So actually, making sure that you feel prepared so that you can go into a shoot and be confident in what you're doing is actually a really overlooked but very important and crucial stage of preparing to shoot a VR piece. Now, obviously with a storyboard, you can change it. You can change it on the day. Things always come up on location that will kind of change your plans. Things will come up that feel better in the moment. Maybe like an actor suggests something, or maybe they accidentally, do something that you hadn't planned for, but you actually really like it. And so you change things as you go. But at least if you've got a stable kind of like foundation idea of what you want to happen, you can move quickly and seamlessly, and so can your crew. Your crew, you are giving them the confidence to do their job properly because they can look to this storyboard as a blueprint for what you want them to do. Okay, so that's why it's important. So let's talk about the differences. The difference between a traditional film storyboard and a 360. Well, in the simplest terms, a traditional film storyboard is a sequence of 16:9 rectangles that represent the final frames that your audience is going to see. If you think about a traditional film storyboard, it's kind of like a paper edit of your film. A 360 storyboard isn't like that though. A 360 storyboard is less about what the final audience is going to see, because as we know, a 360 and a VR audience can pick their own shots. There is no one version of your film. There's thousands of different iterations of how someone will experience it because they get to dictate where they look. So it's less about what the final visuals are going to be, and it's more about the practical creative decisions, like, for example, the choreography of your actors, the plan that you have for that, where the key props are going to be, the dead zones that you want to kind of hide your crew in, and areas that must not be entered by actors when you're recording. It's a much more kind of technical blueprint as opposed to like I say, the creative visuals that you would normally do in a traditional film storyboard. So again, in simplest terms, instead of just 16 by 9 rectangles, a 360 storyboard is usually a bird's eye view circle, which represents, as you imagine, the full 360 that someone can look around. And so if you think of a bird's eye view of a circle, and then in the middle is your audience, aka your camera, if you're doing a 360 video production. But obviously you can use this technique for not just 360 filmmaking, but creating an animation and anything like that. So it's a circle with a dot in the middle that represents your camera. Now, your job, like I say, is to kind of, on that page, put in things like, where are your actors? And again, I use it. I mean, you can do stick people. I know like friends of mine have directed with like Lego pieces. But essentially you're kind of... You're basically now using that as a bird's eye view. I keep using the word blueprint, but that is definitely what it feels like, of things like, which way do you want your audience to be facing? So, I would usually do like little dash lines in the kind of like 90-degree kind of angle that I imagine most people will be looking at. I think because the way you got to think about it is what the field of view is in the VR headset. I think it's actually more than 90 degrees. I don't know what it actually is, but I'm going to say 90, but you might want to look at what headset you're going to be porting your experience to, because maybe your field of view might be a little bit bigger, so you can kind of widen that area. But essentially, you're going to kind of have an idea of where you want your audience to be looking. But obviously, you also have to account for the fact that they might be looking elsewhere. So key props, any lighting rigging, and obviously where your actors are going to be in relation to the camera. All of those things are really important. And then the way that I would storyboard is quite simple. I would just mainly be outlining where my characters are and any key movement that they're going to be doing. So I would use arrows. So say, for example, if you're looking bird's eye view of a circle, so if you do that now, like look down, imagine that you're seeing a circle. In the middle is a dot that represents the camera. Let's say you've got a main character in front of you, and I'm going to characterize them with a red dot. So I've got a red dot right in front of you, and my dashed lines are kind of like facing that way, so you know that I'm expecting the viewer to be looking that way. And then maybe I have a character come from behind on the left-hand side. So if you imagine you've got the red dot in front of you, and then I've got a blue dot to the kind of bottom left-hand side of the circle, and I'll draw a little blue dot there that represents the second actor, and I'll draw an arrow that points, that kind of like the arrow draws to the red circle. So what I'm implying by that is that my second character is going to walk into the shot, is going to walk from where they are over to my first character, and then they're both going to end up in front of me. They're going to end up in front of the camera together. So that would be a really basic example of how I might storyboard something. And then, like I say, I might have like a dead zone for like 90 degrees, or maybe a little bit smaller than that, 45 degrees maybe, directly behind the camera to represent where the crew is going to be hiding or where I might hide the equipment. I might have, a different color to highlight where I think the lighting setup might need to be. If there's any windows in the scene that we need to be careful of for post-production, I might highlight them and also maybe mark that as a bit of a dead zone if I don't want people to cross over into that area. So it's basically you're kind of mapping out your choreography and your key production details on your storyboard. So it's less so about creating a visual representation of what your film will look like in the end, although you can obviously do that as well if you like. I've done that on previous productions, but personally I think that bit is a little bit useless when it comes to 360, because it can be nice to see an idea of what it might end up looking like, but the very nature of the fact that your audience can choose where to look kind of defeats the point of trying to guess what those shots will look like. Of course, I mean, I'm talking about storyboarding in a very traditional sense on a piece of paper, but you could, if you wanted to, if you've got access to a VR headset, you could even storyboard in something like Tilt Brush. You could storyboard in a 3D environment. If you're building your VR film in like a game engine or in animation, maybe actually doing it in a 3D environment would be really exciting and really beneficial. So maybe in Tilt Brush, you could actually, 3D kind of design some of those storyboards. That would be really cool. I mean, I've never done that, but that would actually be, speaking out loud, that's actually a really good idea. So there's loads of different ways you could do it, but the key information that you need on your paper storyboard is those kind of key decisions about choreography, because as we've said in previous episodes, filmmaking in VR and 360 is much more like theatre than film. It's all about the choreography and the personal space in terms of how close people are to the camera than it is about the actual shot sequence, because oftentimes you won't be cutting around your shot. So let's say I've got one scene that's 5 minutes long, that might consist of like 6 different circles for my storyboard. But the camera's always in the same position. It's just the movement of the people that I'm changing, Whereas obviously in a traditional storyboard, you might have 6 different frames that are all different shots that are all one scene. Does that make sense? Now, again, that's my personal preference. I do not like VR pieces that jump around in one scene. I just think that doesn't work. It breaks immersion. I personally just don't like that. But obviously, if you're going to choose to do that, you can do that. You should have probably a good reason to do that and test that out on audiences, because I guarantee you that will disorientate them. Unless that's the point of doing that. But like I say, a lot of the time your scene will be static in terms of your camera will be in the same position. If you're going to do things like camera movement, then obviously you can use the same principle of using like arrows to demonstrate the kind of camera positioning and what your camera is going to be doing. And obviously you can make a note on the side. But the key details that you want to illustrate in your 360 storyboard is actor movement, key prop positioning, any kind of visual effects considerations, and any kind of dead zones that you don't want people to be at. That is basically all a 360 storyboard is. And if you've recce'd your location beforehand, obviously you're going to have a really good idea of where all of those kind of key details are. And that's why I said in the recce episode that potentially that would be a good idea to do a draft storyboard whilst you are there on set, because you can visualize some of those things, or at the very least take photos or a 360 photo so that you can step back into that location and see some of those key details. Because like I said, a storyboard in 360 is as much to prevent technical catastrophes as it is to display your kind of creative decisions. So those are the main details. Now, I did mention at the beginning of the episode that the storyboarding process impacts post-production as much as it does the production itself. And what I mean by that is you can edit your 360 piece on paper, just like you would do a traditional film storyboard. But the editing process for 360 and VR is obviously very different in the fact that you don't know where people are going to be looking. But what you can do is you can use your choreography very cleverly to kind of preempt where you think people are going to be looking. And there's a great article that was written by Jessica Brillhart, she used to be the lead VR filmmaker for Google. She wrote this piece called, I think it's called In the Blink of an Eye. And if you just search 360 editing in the blink of an eye, Jess Brillhart, you will see her Medium article where she basically shows you, like in diagrams, her editing process in 360, and she uses a very similar method to I do with the whole bird's eye view circles. But what she does is lines up her points of interest, and she might have several points of interest, but what she'll do is, in terms of like editing between, she calls them worlds, I would call them scenes, but in terms of editing between scenes, between worlds, you would line up your points of interest so that when you cut scene, you are lining up that next shot. So for example, if we go back to the example of the fact that I've got my red character right in front of us, I've got my blue character behind us, that blue character walks into that front facing bit of the shot to join the red character. They're now both in front of us. When I edit when I like kind of cut to my next scene, when I edit to the next part, I'm going to choose to put, I don't know, a key prop, let's say a horse. I'm going to put a horse right in front of you where those characters just were. Because if I've put both of my characters in front of you and they're talking, I'm going to bet 99% of the time an audience will be looking that way. So when I edit to my next shot, I'm going to line up my next action with where the viewer is looking. Okay, so two characters chatting in front of you, and then the next scene cuts and you've got this horse exactly where those two characters just were. Okay, so in terms of what that would look like on paper, I've gone from having this scene where red's in front, blue's behind, blue arrow, and then in the next scene, red and blue next to each other. In the next circle, blue and red next to each other, and then scene 2, it's the same, exactly where those blue and red dots were. I'm going to replace them with a big brown dot to represent the horse. And it's going to be in the same position as my blue and red dots just were, because it represents that they are in the same place, kind of to the front and to slightly to the left as my characters just were. And this is a way of kind of directing audience attention, is by using, again, that choreography, that placement of props and people to dictate where people are going to be looking. Okay, so when I said that storyboarding is important for post-production, what I mean by that is that although you can't 100% know for sure where your audience is going to be looking, you can definitely have a good idea of where you want your audience to be looking by lining up scenes and in your edit, lining up where your points of interest are going to be, aka characters, aka props, etc., etc. So that's it for this episode. I feel like it was quite difficult to communicate such a visual part of the process in audio form. So let me know if this episode was helpful. And like I said at the beginning, debating on whether to hit pause on this series or whether to carry on talking you through the different parts of the process. So reach out and let me know on both things. It would mean the world to me if you enjoyed this episode or if you found it useful. So again, those details are Alex Makes VR on all social medias, including Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. And if you're already a member of the newsletter, just reply to any of my newsletters to let me know whether I should carry on with this series for now or hit pause. Or you can sign up to the newsletter at alexmakesvr.com. All right, I have got serious dry mouth, guys, so I'm going to go down a litre of water. I hope that you're having a great day wherever you are in the world, and I will speak to you very soon.